This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Maximus. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the morale boost coming from AI deployment.
They don't like going home with a little bit left, maybe 20 to 40% left that they didn't get to, and they like the advantage this portends, provided they one day are going to have the compute and the storage they need as the data deluge continues.
Vice Admiral Frank Whitworth, the director of NGAI, on FedGov Today in just a moment. Uniting program strategy, advanced technology, process, and execution for a more efficient government. That's Maximus. Every program, every service, every time. That's innovation forward. Learn more at maximus.com/federal. The government's using more open source intelligence than it ever has before, according to leaders across the intelligence community. One of the agencies that's affected the most is the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. The director of NGA, Vice Admiral Frank Whitworth, joined me for a plenary session at the AFCEA and INSA Intelligence and National Security Summit at the Gaylord National in National Harbor, Maryland recently. Today, part two of my conversation with Admiral Whitworth about how using open source intelligence has affected the IC and the NGA in particular. When I first started talking to folks and following the issues of and the mission of your agency 10, 15 years ago, there was a great discussion. Some of it was philosophical and some of it was tactical about what the role of the agency was going to be and what the role of the commercial sector was going to be as far as supplying information and so on. And that was about the time that this transition that you've described was starting to happen, that the commercial sector really was creating some of this information that was valuable and maybe more practical for NGA to acquire than to collect itself. But there was a cultural issue, as is often the case in the Pentagon about and in the IC about whether that was the right thing. Is it your sense that that cultural issue has kind of been overcome by events or has been remedied or whatever, that the community as a whole, not even just NGA, but the GEOINT community and government as a whole understands this is how it's going to be moving forward and this is a good thing for them moving forward?
I'm going to take a stab at what that cultural impasse may have been. I wasn't here for that discussion. But I have a feeling it had a lot to do with secrets, and it had a lot to do with classification and some of the walls between the availability of unclassified information and unclassified. And I would tell you, based on our experience, especially in the last 3 years relative to the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, and the availability of something we call GEGD, a portal that we actually worked on with the commercial sector to make 400,000 vetted users get, at the time it is immediately available, commercial images, to include the Ukrainians. I think that whatever that impasse was, we probably, yes, the short answer is I think we've moved along.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Ukraine, and I was curious what lessons one is learning in your community from what's going on in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and so on, not related to the tactical issues on the ground, but related to the way that each side fighting against the other side is collecting information, is potentially using GEOINT that you can then leverage at some future point if, sadly, it would become necessary.
I think that the conflict has demonstrated the real need for unclassified imaging when it comes to articulating the truth and articulating what we like to call just the balls and strikes of the situation. We have a mandate, I believe, to ensure that if there is an image out there, and I'm not saying necessarily it's a commercial image or something like that, it may be over social media or something like that, that could foment some kind of violence, or it might foment harsh emotion or reactions. We want to jump on that and compare it to that which we know. And so commercial imagers are a source, NTM is a source, of course, and we do some comparison to ensure that we kind of establish the validity of that. If you look at it from a geostrategic perspective, I think early in this conflict, it was very clear that we needed to be able to articulate in unclassified ways exactly what's happening on the ground. And so While we have enabled, per our orders, we have enabled the defense of Ukraine. In the meantime, we also have done, I think, a nice job, and I think, and the commercial collection has been instrumental in this, commercial imagery especially, in articulating everything, and from a very objective perspective. And so that to me is very relevant to your question.
The first question from the audience actually ties into that. The question is, what's NGA's strategy for maintaining GEOINT supremacy in the face of increasingly sophisticated denial and deception techniques employed by adversaries? And I would argue that the key word there is deception techniques, that your peers and colleagues that I talk to in uniform talk to me about contested environments, of course, but they think, at least they tell me they think as much about deceptive information at the tip of the spear as a denial of information at the tip of the spear?
It's a great question. It's one that I've addressed in the 5 resolutions that I offered for our year of NGAI, as I call it. 2025 we declared as the year of NGAI, and one of them was to ensure that we know enough about ourselves and our vulnerabilities, and we know enough about our adversaries and their clever nature, that we have people dedicated to answering this question. The tradecraft I'm not going to go into, but I will absolutely tell you that it made the list when you're talking about the top 5 resolutions for how we're going to use AI and ML from now into the future, and we need to ensure that this is one of them.
How are you judging, well, give me a thumbnail if you would on each of the 5, and how you're determining then the progress that you're making against the marks that you set at the beginning of the year?
Well, let's start at the very basic level, and it was the very first one that I uttered in January, and that was, are we task organized as an agency for AI? And we had done a nice job of this. We had people who had the word AI in their mission, had AI in their title, but did we have enough of them, and did we have something that was organized and that made sense? And so we did attack this right off the bat, and we established the Director for AI Mission, the Director for AI Standards, and the Director for AI Programs. Director for AI Mission, a new billet, one that did not exist, how to integrate into training the combatant commands and the services, how to ensure that their systems are set up with the likes of NGA Maven, Maven Smart System, and that they are actually getting the feeds that they need. How are we doing from a multi-level security perspective, the here and now of employment of AI in the targeting cycle. Director of AI Programs, how are we going to do this from a stewardship perspective, not only with the taxpayers' money and do it responsibly, but also from the perspective of all those users. And here's what I mean. We don't want to fixate only on the targeting cycle with NGA Maven. We want to ensure that it brings goodness to the rest of what we do, like warning, like safety of navigation. So we established the PEOs, and we established one PEO that is the PEO for advanced analytics. Notice it doesn't say for warning or targeting or safety of navigation. It's advanced analytics, and that is starting to bear some fruit. And so the Director of AI Programs, I think, was well-founded. It happens to be our Chief Acquisition Executive, so he knows what to do to make sure we do it correctly. And then there's Director of AI Standards. And now we're talking about a person who will ensure that all of the development that is going on out there is not so unbridled that it veers away from the standards that we as Americans hold true, that which we have in the rules of engagement from the Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary of Defense that have been delegated to the engagement authority of that combatant command. We just need to make sure that there are no hobby shops going on here. We want to ensure that at its core, we establish a continuum for accreditation of GEOINT models, and we're well on our way there with something called A-Game, the accreditation of GEOINT AI models, and it's a continuum based on risk and evaluation.
Mm-hmm. I love the term hobby shops. How do you track that? How does your team track that to make sure that the guardrails, the kind of the boundaries that you've set up, that you've established through that, stick and will stick over time and not not result in some kind of creep?
Well, I think your question goes to the brilliance of functional management. And so while it is statutorily only a coordination responsibility, that's still pretty important. That means that somebody has to raise his or her right hand and say, I will take responsibility for GEOINT, for the community, and ensure that we do have standards that are responsible. And while I use the term hobby shop as it's a colloquial piece, we would just want to make sure that we don't have something get into a COCOM or into a service or into the interagency that is either irresponsible, not fully tested, uses training data that hasn't been evaluated, processes that haven't been evaluated, or moves away from the principles, especially the principles like the laws of armed conflict that we hold very dear.
It sounds like the intelligence equivalent of the shadow IT term that's been popular, where somebody goes and buys a server, sticks it under their desk, plugs it into the agency system, not NGAs, of course, and the CIO doesn't know it's there and doesn't know what it's exactly being used for or why it exists.
These are big responsibilities. And one thing I want to make clear, we do not want to move in the direction of like the ATO process where everyone sits and waits.
Yeah.
We want to enable this process to be self-governing so that COCOMs and services, we train the trainers, we train the accreditors, and then they too can accredit the right way. That's why the word standards is so important to the title, the Director of AI Standards.
You've made a couple of references to the workforce already in our conversation, and the times that you and I have spoken before, you are always quick to cite the team, the entire team at the agency, as your greatest asset. One of the questions, the next question is about the workforce. And this in particular, I think I'd like to take us to a broader discussion of your team. How will analyst training and tradecraft need to evolve in order to make maximal and responsible use of new AI technologies? And I would be curious not just about AI, but you mentioned machine learning and you talked about those other three aspects of the golden age of GEOINT. All of those are driven by people and the quality of the people that you have to do the work, I imagine.
This is a great question. I think it goes to the heart of why do we have such a great workforce at NGA, and I would tell you it goes to this intense curiosity and pride that they maintain for being responsible stewards of the GEOINT domain. There is nowhere to turn. No blame that can be offered anywhere else when it comes to GEOINT at the agency level. And they do take the responsibility of being a standard bearer very, very seriously, as do I as the functional manager. So they have these inquiring and discerning hearts that drive them towards accepting improvements to include AI and ML. Sometimes we're drawn to the narrative whereby people are going to be fearful of AI and ML, that it might replace them. I've got a workforce that is excited that they may actually move towards 100% completion of what they were supposed to do that particular day, as opposed to 60 or 80%. And right now, I would just tell you that there's the development of just one program that helps them do their job that does involve AI and ML, addressing one of the most wicked problems that we had, which was the convergence of data labeling with structured observations, and also bringing in LLMs to ensure they get a little help on the writing piece in a way that's contextual and makes sense. And for, I'm not going to go into how much it costs. I'm just going to say it wasn't that much. And we basically, through a really strong collaboration with the commercial sector, in about 4 days coded something that I thought was going to be a wicked problem that was going to take the better part of a year. And you can just tell by the amount of morale increase, as we're unfurling this for our workforce right now, that this is very meaningful to them. They don't like going home with a little bit left, maybe 20 to 40% left that they didn't get to, and they like the advantage this portends, provided they one day are going to have the compute and the storage that they need as the data deluge continues.
It sounds like your experience with those kinds of tools is the same as I hear about at other agencies, where it starts small and then folks find out what their colleagues and friends are able to do in another part of the organization, and they say, I want some of that.
Yeah, and for us, we won't be insular in making it available only to NGA. We take this leadership of GEOINT Enterprise very seriously. We have this thing called the National System for GEOINT, NSG. So everyone who has investment in GEOINT will, at some point benefit from this particular application. We're still literally unfurling it right now and making sure that we have a good training regimen, but I'm very excited for the entire enterprise, frankly.
Vice Admiral Frank Whitworth, the director of NGAI at the AFCEA and INSA Intelligence and National Security Summit at the Gaylord National in National Harbor, Maryland recently. You can read more about NGAI and find a link to part 1 of my conversation with Admiral Whitworth on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. 1DOTIT is the goal for the Transportation Department's Chief Information Officer. He lists processes, people, and products as part of the path to get to that goal. Pavan Padugu, the Chief Information Officer at DOT, will tell you about it on the next FedGov Today TV. You can watch the debut on ABC7 in Washington and on the FedGov Today YouTube channel at 10:30 Sunday morning. If you missed the debut, you can watch anytime at fedgovtoday.com and on YouTube. Thursday, you'll get the third and final part of my conversation with Admiral Whitworth. Tomorrow, a special look at cyber resilience on the FedGov Today podcast and how your agency can achieve it. To make sure you don't miss any FedGov Today podcast, follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows, and you can listen on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for listening.